Troy Karen said, "I know the law." Judge Judy asked her to name one she couldn't. But what happened next shocked everyone in that courtroom, because this wasn't just about fines or painted doors. This was about a woman who'd been destroying lives for 6 years, collecting over $89,000 in illegal fines from 47 families, and she was about to learn that confidence without knowledge is just arrogance wearing a costume. The pale fluorescent lights of Judge Judy's courtroom hummed with their usual sterile persistence, casting everything in that particular shade of truth that makes lies impossible to hide. The air carried that distinct scent of old leather, furniture, polish, and something else. Something sharp and electric, the kind of tension that builds when justice is about to be served cold. This wasn't just any Tuesday morning at the studio. This was the kind of case that producers circled in red on their calendars, the kind that makes crew members text their friends to watch, the kind that would be replayed in law school classrooms and shared millions of times across social media. The gallery was packed shoulder to shoulder. Every seat claimed 30 minutes before filming began. These weren't just random audience members looking for free entertainment. Word had spread through the Meadowbrook Estates community like wildfire. 17 homeowners had driven 4 hours to be here, some taking vacation days from work, some bringing their spouses, all of them carrying the same expression, a mix of vindication and barely contained rage. They'd been waiting years for this moment, years of watching their neighbor, their HOA president, wield power like a weapon, turning their dream homes into anxiety-filled prisons, where every mailbox, every paint color, every blade of grass too tall became another opportunity for a fine, another lecture, another threat. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of anticipation, as people whispered to each other, sharing stories they'd never dared speak loudly before. On the wall behind the judge's bench hung the seal of justice, polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the room back at itself. The plaintiff and defendant tables stood like opposing trenches, separated by just 15 feet of carpet, but representing two completely different universes of understanding. The bailiff, a man who'd seen every variety of human foolishness parade through this courtroom, stood near the side door with his arms crossed, his face betraying nothing but his eyes. His eyes were alert, watching, waiting. Even he sensed this one was different. Judge Judy Schindlin's name didn't just appear on the placard at her bench. It radiated from every corner of the room, from the production crew who'd worked with her for over 2 decades, from the very walls that had absorbed her verdicts, her wisdom, her absolutely zero tolerance for nonsense. She was a legend. Not the soft, flattering kind, but the kind forged in family court trenches where she'd seen every manipulation, every lie, every abuse of power imaginable. 25 years as a family court judge in Manhattan, presiding over more than 20,000 cases, followed by a television career that turned her into the most watched person in daytime TV history. She wasn't famous for being nice. She was famous for being right, for cutting through deception like a scalpel through silk, for making entitled people face themselves in a mirror they couldn't look away from. Her reputation preceded her like a storm front, and anyone foolish enough to walk into her courtroom unprepared learned very quickly that charm, connections, and confidence meant absolutely nothing when matched against facts and law. The camera operators checked their equipment one final time, adjusting angles to capture every micro-expression, every moment of realization, every second of what they knew would be television gold. The red lights on 3 cameras blinked to life, silent witnesses to justice about to unfold. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. The side door opened with a soft click that somehow managed to cut through the murmur of the crowd, and Patricia Whitmore entered the courtroom the way she'd entered every HOA meeting for the past 6 years, like she owned it. She didn't walk. She made an entrance, her heels clicking against the floor with the staccato rhythm of someone who'd practiced power poses in her mirror. She wore a designer blazer in cream, Chanel if the subtle interlocked C's on the buttons were authentic, and probably they were because Patricia never missed an opportunity to remind people that she had standards. The blazer was paired with perfectly pressed black slacks and a silk blouse in champagne that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments. Her highlighted blonde hair was cut in that specific style, the kind that required a name. The Rachel, the Karen, no, this was the Patricia. A heavily layered bob that had been blown out to perfection that morning, each strand locked in place with enough hairspray to survive a Category 3 hurricane. She wore reading glasses on a gold chain around her neck, the kind of accessory that was meant to communicate sophistication, but instead screamed, "I'm about to lecture you." 3 rings decorated her fingers. her wedding band, a diamond anniversary ring, and a gaudy cocktail ring with a stone so large it looked like costume jewelry even though it wasn't. Her wrist carried a Michael Kors watch in rose gold, and her nails were done in a French manicure so perfect it looked painful. But it was what she carried that told you everything you needed to know about Patricia Whitmore. Clutched against her chest like a legal shield, like a talisman of authority, like proof of righteousness, was a binder, not just any binder. This was a 3-inch black leather professional-grade binder with the words, Meadowbrook Estates HOA, embossed in gold lettering on the cover. It bristled with colored tabs, yellow, green, blue, pink, each one marking another section of what she believed was her unassailable documentation. Behind the binder she carried a second, smaller binder, and tucked under her arm was a manila envelope bulging with additional papers. She looked like a lawyer. She held herself like a lawyer. She had the confidence of someone walking into a fight they'd already won. The only problem was that Patricia Whitmore wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't even close. She was a 52-year-old former real estate agent who'd sold her last house in 2016 and decided that running her HOA was a better use of her time, or more accurately, a better outlet for her need to control everything within her line of sight. She'd been HOA president for 6 consecutive years, not because she was elected by overwhelming support, but because she ran unopposed after making the previous president's life so miserable with complaints and procedural challenges that he'd resigned just to escape her. Patricia didn't just show up to the plaintiff's table. She arranged herself, setting down the large binder with a decisive thump that was meant to intimidate, positioning the smaller binder at a precise 90-degree angle, placing the manila envelope just so. She produced a pen from her purse, one of those expensive rollerball pens that executives use to sign important documents, and set it parallel to her binders with the precision of someone setting a table for minor royalty. Then she adjusted her glasses, smoothed her blazer, and turned to look at the gallery behind her. Her eyes found her friend Deborah, sitting in the 3rd row, and she gave a small confident smile and a subtle nod that said, "Watch this." Deborah smiled back, but even from across the room you could see the nervousness in it. The kind of smile that said, "I hope you know what you're doing," rather than "You've got this." Patricia then let her gaze drift to the defendant's table where it landed with all the warmth of a tax audit, and her expression shifted into something that could only be described as barely concealed contempt, the look you give someone who's wasted your valuable time. Who's made you drive all the way out here to explain basic concepts to people who should already understand them? She checked her watch, a gesture of impatience even though they were right on schedule, and exhaled softly as if already exhausted by the ordeal of having to educate everyone in this room. What Patricia Whitmore didn't know, what she couldn't know because she'd spent 6 years in an echo chamber where everyone was either too intimidated or too exhausted to challenge her, was that she was about to become a cautionary tale, about to have her false expertise dismantled piece by piece, about to learn the difference between having authority and having knowledge. And that lesson was going to be delivered by the one person in America you absolutely do not want to face unprepared. The bailiff stood straighter, his hand moving toward the door behind the bench, and the room fell into immediate silence. Even Patricia stopped arranging her papers, her hands freezing mid-adjustment as every eye turned toward that door. What came next was less an entrance and more the arrival of a force of nature. The door opened and Judge Judy Scheindlin walked in, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. She wore her signature judicial robe, black and crisp, but it was the way she wore it that mattered, not like a costume, but like armor, like a declaration. Beneath it you could see her trademark lace collar, white and delicate, a deceptive softness that framed a face that held no softness whatsoever. Her hair was styled in its familiar short, no-nonsense cut, every strand in place, practical and perfect. Her pearl earrings caught the light as she moved, small and elegant, the only jewelry she ever wore in court because she didn't need accessories to command respect. She earned it. Judge Judy didn't look at the gallery, didn't acknowledge the cameras, didn't smile or wave or perform any of the small social niceties that lubricate normal human interactions. She simply walked to her bench with a gait that suggested she'd made this walk 10,000 times, and every single one of those times she'd been the most prepared person in the room. She sat, adjusted her robe with one precise movement, and then only then did she look up. Her eyes swept the courtroom like searchlights, passing over the gallery, the bailiff, the court reporter, landing briefly on Patricia with her tower of binders, then moving to the defendant's table where a nervous-looking man in his 30s sat with a single thin folder, and then back to Patricia. The sweep took maybe 3 seconds. It felt like an hour. Judge Judy placed her hands flat on the bench in front of her, a gesture that looked casual but wasn't. It was the stance of someone planting their flag, claiming territory, establishing dominance before a single word was spoken. The silence stretched. Someone in the gallery shifted and the bench creaked like a gunshot. Patricia straightened in her chair, suddenly less confident, her hand moving unconsciously to touch her binder as if drawing strength from it. Judge Judy's expression didn't change. She didn't smile, didn't frown, didn't offer any read on what she was thinking. Her face was a mask of professional neutrality that somehow managed to communicate absolute authority. When she finally spoke, her voice cut through the silence like a verdict. This is case number JJ2847, Patricia Whitmore versus Marcus Thompson, regarding alleged HOA violations and fines totaling $2,400. She paused, her eyes moving to Patricia. Ms. Whitmore, you're the plaintiff, which means you brought this case. You're also the HOA president, which means you think you have authority. Let me be very clear about something before we start. Another pause, this one deliberate, calculated to make everyone lean forward. This is not your neighborhood. This is not an HOA meeting where you get to make up rules and everyone has to smile and nod. This is my courtroom, and in my courtroom the only thing that matters is the law, not your feelings, not your binders full of printed emails, not how long you've been president of anything. The law. Do you understand the difference? Patricia's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Yes, Your Honor, of course I understand the law. That's exactly why I'm here, because Mr. Thompson has repeatedly violated. Judge Judy's hand came up, one finger raised, and Patricia stopped mid-sentence like she'd hit a wall. I didn't ask you to present your case yet. I asked you a yes or no question. Do you understand the difference between HOA rules and actual law? Patricia's face flushed slightly, a pink tinge creeping up her neck. Yes, Your Honor. Good. Now tell me what you're suing for. Patricia reached for her large binder, flipping it open with the confidence of someone about to prove a point. Your Honor, Mr. Thompson has violated HOA Code Section 7.3.4 by painting his front door an unauthorized color, specifically a shade of blue that is not within our approved color palette. He installed a mailbox that doesn't meet HOA specifications for size and style. He has repeatedly parked his vehicle in his driveway at an angle that violates our parking standards. And most egregiously, he built a raised garden bed without submitting the proper architectural approval forms. Each violation carries a $150 fine as outlined in our enforcement policy, totaling $2,400, which he has refused to pay despite multiple certified letters. She said it all in one breath, her voice taking on that particular tone of someone who's repeated these complaints so many times they've become scripture. Judge Judy leaned back slightly, her expression unchanged. How long have you been HOA president, Ms. Whitmore? 6 years, Your Honor. 6 years. And in those 6 years, how many people have you fined? Patricia hesitated just for a second. I don't have exact numbers. Ballpark, perhaps. 40 or 50 homeowners. 40 or 50? Judge Judy let that number hang in the air. Mr. Thompson, stand up. Marcus Thompson stood slowly, a thin man in his mid-30s wearing a simple button-down shirt and khakis. The kind of outfit someone wears when they're not trying to impress anyone, just trying to be taken seriously. His folder looked pathetic next to Patricia's arsenal of binders. Mr. Thompson, what do you do for a living? Judge Judy asked. I'm a software engineer, Your Honor. And how long have you lived in Meadowbrook Estates? 2 years and 4 months. In those 2 years and 4 months, how many times has Ms. Whitmore fined you? Marcus glanced at his folder. 16 times, Your Honor. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Judy's eyebrow raised slightly. 16 times. That's one fine every 6 weeks. What's the total of all those fines? The total she's demanded is $8,600, Your Honor. I've paid $6,200 under protest because she threatened to put a lien on my house. This case is for the $2,400 in most recent fines that I'm refusing to pay. The murmur grew louder. Judge Judy's eyes snapped to Patricia, whose face had gone from pink to white. Ms. Whitmore, you told me the total was $2,400. You didn't mention you'd already collected over $6,000 from this man. Patricia's hands fluttered over her binders like nervous birds. Your Honor, those previous fines were for different violations. They're not part of this case. I was only addressing the current. You were only addressing what made you look reasonable. Judge Judy cut in, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. Let me ask you something else. You said you've fined 40 or 50 homeowners in 6 years. How much money total has your HOA collected in fines under your leadership? Patricia's eyes darted to her friend Deborah in the gallery. I don't know the exact figure off the top of my head. Ballpark. You like that word, right? You used it to describe violations in your letters to Mr. Thompson. Give me a ballpark. The silence was suffocating. Patricia licked her lips. Maybe 30 or 40,000? Try again. Judge Judy's voice was ice. And before you lie to me in my courtroom, understand that Mr. Thompson's attorneys subpoenaed your HOA financial records. I have them right here. She tapped a thin folder on her bench. So I'm going to ask you one more time. How much money has been collected in fines? Patricia's voice came out as barely a whisper. $89,400. The gallery exploded. People gasped. Someone shouted, "I knew it!" Another voice yelled, "That's my money." The bailiff had to step forward, raising his hand for silence. Judge Judy waited, letting the reaction play out for exactly 3 seconds before speaking again. And when she did, her voice could have frozen hell itself. $89,000. From 47 families. Over 6 years. For mailboxes and paint colors and garden beds. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Patricia like a predator who'd just cornered its prey. Here's what's interesting, Ms. Whitmore. Mr. Thompson's attorney didn't just subpoena your financial records. He also pulled your HOA's original CC&Rs, your covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The actual legal document that homeowners sign when they purchase property in your neighborhood. Do you know what he found? Patricia said nothing. Her hands had stopped moving. She looked like she'd forgotten how to breathe. He found that 60% of the violations you've been fining people for aren't in the CC&Rs at all. They're rules you made up. Rules you decided on. Rules you enforced like they were law. So I'm going to ask you a very simple question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Judge Judy paused, and the entire courtroom held its breath. You've claimed multiple times in your letters to Mr. Thompson and in your opening statement to me that you know the law. So tell me, Ms. Whitmore, name one law, just one statute, one legal code that gives you the authority to fine someone $150 for planting flowers in their own yard. Patricia's mouth opened. Nothing came out. She looked down at her binders, her hands moving to flip through the pages, the tabs, the sections she'd organized so carefully. Yellow tab, property standards. Green tab, violation notices. Blue tab, email correspondence. Pink tab, board meeting minutes. Page after page of complaints. Photographs of mailboxes, printed Google Maps images with circles drawn around driveways. Spreadsheets tracking violation dates. But no laws. Not a single statute number. Not one legal code. Not even a county ordinance. Her fingers moved faster, more frantically, flipping past homeowner complaints. Past her own typed letters with phrases like, as HOA president, I have determined and the board has decided and failure to comply will result in. She could feel every eye in the courtroom on her. Could feel the weight of Judge Judy's stare. Could hear her own breathing getting faster. Your Honor, the HOA operates under the authority granted in the CC&Rs, and as president I have the right to enforce. I didn't ask about your HOA. I didn't ask about CC&Rs. I asked you to name a law. One law. Patricia's hands stilled on the pages. The silence stretched like taffy, pulling thinner and thinner until everyone thought it would snap. The HOA law gives us... There is no HOA law, Judge Judy said flatly. HOAs are private organizations that can enforce reasonable restrictions that are clearly written in properly filed CC&Rs. They are not governments. They cannot create laws. They can only enforce what homeowners contractually agreed to. And even then, only if those restrictions don't violate actual law. You don't know this, do you? Patricia's voice came out small, defeated. Your Honor, I've been doing this for 6 years. 6 years of being wrong doesn't make you right. It makes you a bully with a gavel. Judge Judy pulled off her glasses, setting them on the bench with a soft click that sounded like a cell door closing. Here's my ruling. You owe Mr. Thompson $8,600, the full amount of every fine you've collected from him. Because 60% of your violations aren't valid, and the other 40% were enforced selectively and excessively. You also owe him $400 for his attorney fees and his time off work for this nonsense. Total judgment $10,000. Furthermore, I'm ordering you to provide a full accounting of every fine collected during your tenure to every homeowner in your HOA within 30 days. And they should lawyer up because you're about to get sued by 46 more families. The gavel came down like thunder. Patricia sat frozen, her binders suddenly nothing more than expensive kindling. Marcus Thompson closed his folder, a small smile finally crossing his face. If you're sitting there thinking, finally someone held an HOA tyrant accountable, then hit that like button right now because that little thumbs up tells us you want more of these justice stories. The courtroom doors hadn't even closed before Patricia's phone started buzzing. Text messages from neighbors who'd watched the live taping. 43 messages in the first 10 minutes. Her friend Deborah walked 3 steps behind her in the hallway. Silent, no longer offering comfort because what comfort could possibly exist after that? Within 6 hours of the episode airing, the Meadowbrook Estates Facebook group had 312 new posts. Homeowners who'd paid fines for unauthorized wreaths and improper hedge heights and lawn ornaments exceeding size restrictions came out of the woodwork like survivors finally safe to tell their stories. Someone created a spreadsheet, 47 families, $89,400 in fines. And now they had Judge Judy's verdict as ammunition. A class action lawsuit was filed within 3 weeks. Patricia Whitmore resigned as HOA president 4 days after the episode aired. Her letter citing health reasons, when everyone knew the real reason was that she couldn't show her face at another board meeting. The new HOA president was a retired paralegal who actually understood the law, who reduced fees by 40%, who implemented actual democratic voting, who focused on real community issues like fixing streetlights instead of measuring the blue content in someone's front door paint. Marcus Thompson planted an even bigger garden. He painted his shutters to match his door. He installed a bird feeder that Patricia would have fined him $300 for. And every morning when he checked his mail, he smiled, because the mailbox that had caused so much trouble was still there, and nobody was coming to fine him for it. Property values in Meadowbrook Estates didn't plummet like Patricia had warned. They went up. Turns out people like living in neighborhoods where they're not terrified of their own HOA. The clip of Judge Judy asking name one law hit 6.2 million views in 2 weeks, spawning hundreds of TikToks, becoming a rallying cry for homeowners across America who were tired of petty tyrants with binders pretending authority was the same as knowledge. And that's the story of how 3 words destroyed a 6-year reign of suburban tyranny. If this video gave you that sweet, sweet justice satisfaction, make sure you're subscribed because we've got dozens more stories like this coming your way. Smash that like button if you think every HOA Karen needs a Judge Judy reality check, and drop a comment telling us your worst HOA horror story. We read every single one, and your story might be featured in our next video. Check out the video in the description about the entitled parent who tried to scam a veteran out of his service dog. Trust me, the karma in that one is absolutely chef's kiss. Thanks for watching, and remember, confidence without knowledge is just arrogance in a blazer. See you in the next one. The Judge Judy courtroom fell dead silent. Linda Patterson, a 52-year-old HOA president from Scottsdale, Arizona, stood frozen at the plaintiff's podium, her face drained of all color. Just 30 seconds earlier, she had been confident, even cocky, clutching her oversized briefcase and speaking with the authority of someone who had never been challenged. But now her hands were visibly shaking as she stared at Judge Judy Sheindlin, who was leaning back in her chair with a look that could melt steel. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Mrs. Patterson, Judge Judy said, her Brooklyn accent cutting through the silence like a razor blade. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. You threatened to sue me for doing my job. That's not just stupid, that's potentially criminal. The camera caught Patterson's mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. No sound coming out. Behind her, the defendant Maria Martinez sat in stunned disbelief, realizing that her nightmare HOA president was about to get destroyed on national television. What happened in the next 12 minutes would become the most devastating takedown in Judge Judy's 28-year career. The video would explode across every social media platform, racking up over 75 million views in just 72 hours. Legal experts would analyze it frame by frame. Law schools would add it to their curriculum as a masterclass in courtroom authority. But most importantly, Linda Patterson would learn the hardest lesson of her life about the catastrophic difference between neighborhood power and actual legal expertise. But here's what makes this story absolutely incredible, and why millions of people have watched it over and over again. Patterson didn't just threaten Judge Judy once, she threatened her 3 separate times during the hearing, each threat more outrageous than the last, and each time Judge Judy's response became more surgical, more devastating, until Patterson was left completely humiliated and facing potential legal consequences that could have destroyed her life. This wasn't supposed to happen. Patterson had come to the Judge Judy show expecting an easy victory. She had ruled her 127-home community with an iron fist for 3 years, foreclosing on families, imposing thousands in illegal fines, and creating a reign of terror that had driven people from their homes. She had never lost a dispute, never been challenged by anyone with real authority, and certainly never faced someone who could expose her complete ignorance of the law she claimed to understand. Patterson had spent weeks preparing what she called her legal strategy. She had practiced her opening statement in the mirror, organized her massive binder with color-coded tabs, and even bought a new briefcase to look more professional. She was convinced this would be the easiest $5,000 she'd ever make, and she planned to use her inevitable victory to justify even more aggressive tactics back home in Arizona. But Patterson had made one fatal error. She had researched everything about the case except the most important thing: who exactly Judge Judy Sheindlin really was. She knew her as a TV personality, a tough-talking woman who yelled at people on daytime television. What she didn't know was that she was about to go toe-to-toe with a retired New York State family court judge who had presided over more than 20,000 cases, had dealt with every type of legal manipulation imaginable, and had zero tolerance for people who abused authority they didn't actually possess. The case seemed straightforward enough. Maria Martinez, a single mother working 2 jobs to support her kids, was suing Patterson's HOA to recover $3,200 in what she claimed were illegal fines. The violations seemed petty. Children's bicycles visible in the driveway, a small garden gnome in the front yard, and parking her 10-year-old Honda Civic in her own driveway instead of the garage. But behind these seemingly minor disputes was a much darker story of systematic harassment, legal intimidation, and a power-hungry HOA president who had forgotten that her authority had limits. What made Patterson's downfall so spectacular wasn't just that she was wrong about the law. It was that she was wrong about everything. She had misunderstood the nature of HOA authority, misrepresented Arizona state statutes, and completely fabricated legal principles that simply didn't exist. For 3 years, she had gotten away with it because homeowners didn't know enough to challenge her, but Judge Judy knew exactly what she was dealing with from the moment Patterson opened her mouth. The courtroom was packed that day with the usual mix of audience members, production staff, and legal observers who came to watch America's toughest TV judge in action. None of them expected to witness what would become one of the most thorough legal humiliations ever captured on television. Patterson walked in like she owned the place, wheeling her briefcase behind her and nodding confidently at the cameras. She had even worn her power outfit, a navy blazer with gold buttons that she thought made her look authoritative. But before we dive into exactly how a suburban HOA, Karen tried to intimidate a real judge and got absolutely annihilated, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what you're about to witness isn't just reality TV gold. It's a masterclass in why you should never threaten someone who actually knows the law. And it's a perfect example of what happens when fake authority meets real power. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, or witnessed someone get their comeuppance in spectacular fashion, drop your craziest HOA horror story in the comments below. Because after you see what happened to Linda Patterson, you'll understand why so many people have called this the most satisfying judicial smackdown ever recorded. Let's see who's got the wildest tales of power-hungry neighbors who finally met their match. To understand why Linda Patterson's destruction was so complete and so satisfying, you need to know exactly who these 2 women were and why this confrontation was inevitable. This wasn't just a dispute over HOA fines. This was a collision between fake authority and real power. Between someone who had spent years bullying people with made-up legal knowledge and someone who had dedicated her entire career to actual justice. Linda Patterson had moved to the Sunset Ridge community in Scottsdale, Arizona in 2019 after taking early retirement from her middle management position at a regional insurance company. She was 49 years old, recently divorced and looking for a new sense of purpose and control in her life. Within 6 months of moving in, she had positioned herself for the HOA board by volunteering for every committee and showing up to every meeting with detailed notes and strong opinions about how the community should be run. By 2020, she was elected to the board. By 2021, she was president, and by 2022, she had transformed from a concerned homeowner into the neighborhood dictator that everyone feared and despised. Patterson ruled her 127-home community with an iron fist that would have made a military commander proud. She conducted what she called compliance patrols every morning at 7 a.m., walking through the neighborhood with a clipboard and camera, documenting every possible violation she could find. Her reign of terror was methodical and ruthless. She had imposed over $180,000 in fines across the community in just 2 years. She had foreclosed on 3 families who couldn't pay her escalating penalties. She had banned children's chalk art, sidewalk decorations, and even flowers that she deemed non-compliant with community standards. Parents were afraid to let their kids play outside because Patterson would cite them for noise violations. Elderly residents lived in fear of accidentally leaving their trash cans out past the designated pickup time. But here's what made Patterson truly dangerous. She had convinced herself that she was some kind of legal expert. Despite having zero legal training, never attending law school, and never even taking a paralegal course, she spoke with absolute authority about property law, constitutional rights, and legal precedent. She had spent hours on Google researching legal terms, printed out random statutes she didn't understand, and created her own twisted interpretation of how HOA law worked. Patterson carried herself like a lawyer. She wore blazers to board meetings, carried legal pads everywhere, and peppered her speech with phrases like pursuant to Arizona revised statutes and in accordance with established legal precedent. She had created an intimidating persona that made homeowners believe she actually knew what she was talking about. When people challenged her decisions, She would respond with threats about legal consequences and violations of binding covenants that sounded official enough to scare most people into compliance. Her favorite tactic was the legal threat. Whenever homeowners pushed back against her fines or questioned her authority, Patterson would pull out her phone and start recording, claiming she was documenting legal harassment and threatening to pursue all available legal remedies. She had successfully convinced dozens of families that fighting her would result in expensive lawsuits they couldn't afford to defend against. The truth was that Patterson had never filed a single lawsuit in her life. She had never been inside a courtroom except for her own divorce proceedings. She had never read an actual legal brief or understood how civil litigation actually worked. Her entire legal persona was an elaborate bluff that had worked perfectly for 3 years because none of her victims had the knowledge or resources to call her on it. Judge Judy Sheindlin was everything Patterson pretended to be. Before becoming America's most famous television judge, Judith Sheindlin had spent 25 years as a prosecutor and family court judge in New York. She had handled over 20,000 cases, presided over every type of family dispute imaginable, and dealt with every variety of legal ignorance, manipulation, and abuse that existed. She had seen countless people try to use fake legal authority to intimidate others, and she had zero tolerance for bullies who exploited people's lack of legal knowledge. Judge Judy had earned her law degree from New York Law School in 1965, when very few women were entering the legal profession. She had worked as a corporate lawyer, a family court prosecutor, and eventually became the supervising judge in Manhattan Family Court. She had written books on legal issues, lectured at law schools, and built a reputation as one of the toughest, fairest, and most knowledgeable judges in New York's court system. When she transitioned to television in 1996, Judge Judy brought all of that real-world legal experience with her. Unlike other TV judges who were primarily entertainers, Sheindlin was applying actual legal knowledge to resolve real disputes. She could spot legal incompetence from across the courtroom, and she had a particular hatred for people who used fake authority to harm others. The stakes for this particular case couldn't have been higher. Maria Martinez wasn't just fighting for $200 in fines. She was fighting for her family's financial survival and her right to live peacefully in her own home. A single mother working 2 jobs as a hotel housekeeper and evening restaurant server, Martinez had scraped together every dollar to buy her modest home in Sunset Ridge. She had thought she was moving into a quiet family neighborhood where her 2 young children could ride their bikes and play safely. Instead, she had found herself targeted by Patterson's systematic harassment campaign. The fines had started small, $50 here and there for minor violations like leaving a garden hose visible or having her children's toys in the front yard. But Patterson had escalated quickly, imposing larger and larger penalties for increasingly ridiculous violations. The $800 fine for the garden gnome had been followed by a $600 fine for bicycles in the driveway, then a $900 fine for parking her car outside the garage, and finally a $925 fine for what Patterson called excessive noise from minor children. Martinez had paid every fine, draining her savings and going into debt, because Patterson had convinced her that refusal to pay would result in foreclosure and legal action that would destroy her credit and her children's future. She had come to Judge Judy as a last resort, hoping that someone with real legal authority might be able to help her understand whether what Patterson was doing was actually legal. Patterson, meanwhile, had come to the show expecting the easiest victory of her life. She saw Judge Judy as just another authority figure she could intimidate with her fake legal expertise and aggressive personality. She had no idea that she was about to face someone who could see right through her act and had the knowledge and power to expose her completely. The morning of the taping, Linda Patterson arrived at the studio 2 hours early, wheeling her oversized briefcase behind her like a federal prosecutor heading to the Supreme Court. She had spent the previous evening practicing her opening statement in her hotel room mirror, perfecting what she called her courtroom presence. She wore her most expensive blazer, carried a leather portfolio stuffed with printed HOA bylaws, and had even brought backup copies of every document she planned to reference. Patterson was convinced this would be the performance of her lifetime. She had watched dozens of Judge Judy episodes to prepare, taking notes on successful strategies and legal arguments that had worked for other plaintiffs. What she failed to understand was that she was watching edited television, not real courtroom procedure, and that Judge Judy's legal expertise went far beyond what viewers saw in their living rooms. When the cameras started rolling, Patterson's confidence was immediately apparent. She stood straighter, spoke louder, and radiated the kind of self-assurance that came from 3 years of unchallenged neighborhood authority. The case seemed straightforward to her. She would present her legal arguments, cite her HOA powers, and Judge Judy would rule in her favor. After all, she had the law on her side, or at least what she believed was the law. Judge Judy's opening question should have been Patterson's first warning. Mrs. Patterson, are you an attorney licensed to practice law in Arizona or any other state? The question was simple, direct, and loaded with implications that Patterson completely missed. No, Your Honor, but I am well versed in property law and homeowners association regulations as they apply to covenant enforcement and community standards compliance. The response was pure, Patterson, unnecessarily complicated, filled with legal-sounding phrases and completely missing the point. Judge Judy's eyebrow raised slightly, a subtle signal that anyone familiar with her show would have recognized as danger. Mrs. Patterson, when you say you're well versed in property law, what exactly does that mean? Where did you study property law? Patterson's answer revealed everything Judge Judy needed to know. Your Honor, I have extensively researched Arizona revised statutes, consulted multiple legal databases, and attended several HOA management seminars that covered legal compliance issues. It was the response of someone who had confused Google searches with legal education, seminars with law school, and reading statutes with understanding them. Judge Judy had heard enough. She leaned forward in her chair, removed her glasses with deliberate slowness, and fixed Patterson with a stare that could have frozen lava. Mrs. Patterson, let me explain something to you about legal authority. I've been practicing law since 1965. I've presided over more than 20,000 cases. I've dealt with every type of legal fraud, manipulation, and incompetence that exists. So when someone with no legal training comes into my courtroom and starts throwing around legal terminology they clearly don't understand, I take it personally. The courtroom was dead silent. Patterson's confident smile began to falter as she realized this wasn't going according to her carefully rehearsed plan. Your Honor, I believe there may be some misunderstanding about the scope of HOA authority under Arizona law. Judge Judy cut her off with a gesture that could have stopped traffic. Stop right there. Let's talk about Arizona law. You fined Mrs. Martinez $800 for having a garden gnome in her yard. Show me the Arizona statute that gives you that authority. Patterson fumbled through her massive binder, pages rustling as she searched for something, anything that might support her position. Well, Your Honor, our CC&Rs clearly state in Section 4.2 that unauthorized decorative items are prohibited, and under Arizona Revised Statute 33-1803, COs have broad enforcement powers. Judge Judy's voice turned ice cold. Did you just cite Arizona Revised Statute 33-1803 to me? Patterson nodded confidently, apparently thinking she had scored a point. Yes, Your Honor, which clearly establishes our authority to... Mrs. Patterson, Arizona Revised Statute 33-1803 deals with HOA board meeting requirements. It has absolutely nothing to do with decorative items or enforcement powers. You just cited a completely irrelevant statute and claimed it supports your argument. That's not legal ignorance. Mrs. Patterson, that's legal fraud. The color drained from Patterson's face as she realized her first major blunder had been exposed on national television. Patterson's face was now bright red, sweat beginning to form on her forehead despite the air-conditioned studio. She could feel her carefully constructed legal persona crumbling in real time. But instead of backing down, she made the decision that would completely destroy her. In a moment of pure desperation and wounded pride, Linda Patterson decided to threaten Judge Judy Scheindlin. Your Honor, I have to say that I'm finding this proceeding highly irregular and frankly biased against homeowners associations. Your interpretation of Arizona statute seems questionable at best, and I'm beginning to wonder if you're qualified to handle HOA law cases. I may need to consider filing an appeal of this decision, and possibly a complaint about judicial conduct that appears to be prejudiced against property owners' rights. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The courtroom audience audibly gasped. Maria Martinez's mouth fell open in shock. Even the camera operators seemed to stop moving. Patterson had just threatened to sue Judge Judy Scheindlin for doing her job. The silence that followed was so complete, you could have heard a pin drop from 3 courtrooms away. Judge Judy slowly stood up from her chair, something she rarely did during hearings. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, controlled, and absolutely terrifying. Mrs. Patterson, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. Did you just threaten to file a complaint against me for applying the actual law instead of your made-up HOA fantasies? Patterson, apparently not understanding the magnitude of her error, doubled down. Your Honor, I'm simply protecting my rights and the rights of homeowners associations everywhere. If this court is going to ignore established HOA authority, then yes, I am prepared to pursue all available legal remedies. Judge Judy's response was swift and nuclear. Mrs. Patterson, do you have any idea what you just did? You threatened to file a frivolous lawsuit against a sitting judge. In the legal profession, we have terms for that kind of behavior. It's called barratry in some jurisdictions, abuse of process in others, and in extreme cases, it can result in criminal charges for intimidating a judicial officer. The blood drained from Patterson's face as she began to realize she had made a catastrophic error. "Your Honor, I didn't mean to threaten anyone. I was simply—" Judge Judy cut her off with a voice that could have shattered glass. "Oh, but you did threaten me, Mrs. Patterson. You thought you could intimidate me the same way you've been intimidating the homeowners in your little kingdom. But here's the difference. They don't know the law, and I do. They don't have the power to expose your fraud, and I do. And unlike the families you've been terrorizing, I'm not afraid of your empty threats and made-up legal authority." Patterson tried desperately to backtrack. "Your Honor, perhaps I misspoke, but Judge Judy was just getting started." "No, Mrs. Patterson, you didn't misspeak. You revealed exactly who you are, a bully who uses fake legal knowledge to intimidate people who don't know any better. But your luck just ran out." Judge Judy wasn't finished destroying Patterson's world. "Let's talk about the real law, Mrs. Patterson. The law you've been violating for 3 years. Arizona Revised Statute 33-1317 specifically protects homeowners' rights to children's recreational equipment in driveways during daylight hours. You violated that law when you fined Mrs. Martinez for her children's bicycles. Arizona Revised Statute 33-1808 requires specific procedures for imposing fines that you clearly never followed. You violated that law with every single penalty you've imposed." Patterson tried desperately to interrupt. "Your Honor, if I could just explain our community standards—" Judge Judy's voice rose to a level that made the walls shake. "I'm not finished. Arizona law also requires HOAs to provide homeowners with detailed notice and appeal procedures before imposing fines." "Did you do that, Mrs. Patterson?" The silence was deafening. "I'm ruling in favor of Mrs. Martinez for the full $3,200 plus interest. But that's not all. I'm recommending that Mrs. Martinez file complaints with the Arizona Department of Real Estate and the State Attorney General's office about your illegal practices. And Mrs. Patterson, if you follow through on your threat to file a complaint against me, I guarantee you'll face sanctions for abuse of process and potential criminal charges for intimidating a judicial officer." But wait, Judge Judy wasn't done destroying this HOA Karen's entire worldview. What happened next was so legally devastating that law professors are still using it in their classes. If you're loving this judicial smackdown, smash that like button and let me know in the comments. What's the craziest power trip you've ever witnessed someone take? Because Patterson was about to learn that real power comes from real knowledge. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within hours of the episode airing, the clip exploded across every social media platform. HOA Karen threatens Judge Judy became the top trending topic on Twitter. TikTok was flooded with reaction videos. Legal experts on CNN and Fox News praised Judge Judy's handling of the case as a masterclass in exposing legal fraud. But the real-world consequences for Linda Patterson were devastating. 3 weeks after the show aired, she resigned as HOA president under pressure from the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which had opened a formal investigation into Sunset Ridge HOA practices. 17 homeowners filed complaints against the HOA, and 6 families successfully recovered over $23,000 in illegally imposed fines. Maria Martinez became a hero in her community, finally able to let her children play in their own driveway, without fear of harassment. The Arizona Attorney General's office used Patterson's case as an example in new legislation, requiring HOA board training on actual property law. Patterson's downfall became a case study in law schools about the danger of fake legal authority. Her threat against Judge Judy was analyzed as a perfect example of how ignorance and arrogance can destroy someone's life in minutes. The broader lesson resonated far beyond one HOA dispute. Patterson had ruled through intimidation and manufactured legal expertise for 3 years. But when she faced someone with real knowledge, her house of cards collapsed instantly. Judge Judy proved that expertise always defeats empty authority, and that bullies who abuse their power will eventually face someone who can expose them. The lesson is crystal clear. Confidence without competence is just arrogance in disguise. Patterson thought her HOA position made her a legal expert, but Judge Judy proved that real authority comes from real knowledge. If this story inspired you to stand up to bullies who abuse their power, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more stories of justice served and karma delivered. Drop a comment below with your worst HOA horror story, and remember that in a world full of people who think their position gives them power, expertise always wins. Just ask Linda Patterson, if you can find her after she slunk away from that courtroom, never to threaten a real judge again. The fluorescent lights of Stage 18 at Sunset Bronson Studios hummed with their usual sterile brightness, casting sharp shadows across the iconic courtroom set that had become synonymous with no-nonsense justice. Judge Judy's domain was not a place where excuses survived or egos left intact. The wood-paneled walls, the American flag standing sentinel behind the bench, The gallery seats filled with nervous litigants clutching manila folders. All of it radiated an authority that had humbled thousands. This was where reality punctured delusion, where the cameras captured not just legal disputes, but the precise moment people realized they'd miscalculated everything. And on this particular Tuesday morning in March, those cameras were about to witness the fastest career implosion in influencer history, broadcast not just to Judge Judy's 10 million television viewers, but live-streamed to 1.2 million followers who were watching one woman's empire crumble in real time, one sponsor notification at a time. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Madison Kensington walked into the courtroom like she was entering a film premiere. Her honey blonde hair fell in perfectly styled waves that had taken her hairstylist 2 hours to achieve that morning. Each strand placed with the precision of someone who understood that every angle mattered when you were always on camera. She wore a cream-colored designer blazer over a silk blouse, paired with tailored pants that struck the perfect balance between serious plaintiff and relatable girl boss. Her left hand gripped her iPhone 15 Pro Max, mounted on a stabilizer gimbal that cost more than most people's monthly rent. A ring light clipped to the top, casting a soft, flattering glow on her face. Her right hand clutched a burgundy leather portfolio, the kind influencers carried to look professional in Instagram stories. But it was her expression that told you everything you needed to know about Madison Kensington. The subtle smirk playing at the corners of her glossed lips, the confidence in her stride, the way her eyes kept flicking to her phone screen to monitor the comment feed that was already exploding with reactions. The other litigants waiting their turn in the gallery seats stared, their confusion palpable. A middle-aged woman in a floral print dress leaned toward her companion and whispered just loud enough to be heard, "Is she seriously filming this?" A man in an ill-fitting suit shook his head, his eyes wide with disbelief. But Madison didn't notice, or perhaps didn't care. She was reading the live comments scrolling past. "Yes, Queen, take her down, and Madison, you're glowing even in court." And this is the content we needed. Her 2.8 million followers on Instagram, built over 6 years of lifestyle content, wellness tips, and aspirational luxury, were watching their favorite influencer do what she did best, turn everything into content. What none of them knew yet, what Madison herself hadn't fully grasped in her content creator tunnel vision, was that in approximately 47 minutes, 8 major brand partnerships worth a combined $847,000 in annual revenue would vanish, not over days or weeks but during the trial itself, as her sponsors watched the live stream and realized they'd attached their reputations to someone whose relationship with truth was about to be surgically exposed. The bailiff, a stocky man in his 50s who'd seen everything this courtroom could produce, called out in a voice that had announced thousands of cases. "Kensington versus Chen, case number 4782. Madison adjusted her phone angle one last time, making sure the framing captured both her face and the iconic Judge Judy bench in the background, then walked toward the plaintiff's podium with the kind of measured steps she'd practiced for runway content. Her opponent, Susan Chen, a 52-year-old small business owner wearing a simple navy dress and carrying a worn briefcase, stood at the defendant's podium, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Behind the raised bench, Judge Judy Schindlin sat motionless, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the case file. Then her eyes lifted, sharp and assessing as a raptor's, and locked onto the phone in Madison's hand, the ring light still glowing, the red recording indicator visible even from across the courtroom. The judge's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those eyes, something that should have sent a warning signal straight to Madison's brain if she hadn't been so busy checking her viewer count, which had just hit 450,000 and climbing. Madison Kensington hadn't always been the kind of person who live-streamed courtroom battles. 6 years earlier, she'd been Madison Chen, yes, the same last name as the woman now standing across from her, her former business partner, and the person suing her for $43,000. Back then, Madison was a 24-year-old marketing graduate with a decent eye for aesthetics and an exceptional talent for making her life look more glamorous than it actually was. Her first Instagram post to gain traction was a flat lay of her morning routine: overpriced coffee, a succulent in a minimalist pot, her laptop open to a motivational quote, and the caption, "Building my empire one latte at a time." It got 3,000 likes, which in 2018 felt like winning the lottery. She'd found her formula: aspirational relatability, the illusion of luxury accessible to anyone willing to hustle, and just enough vulnerability to seem authentic without actually revealing anything real. The followers came slowly at first, then exponentially. Within 2 years, she'd hit 500,000, and the sponsorship offers started flooding her DMs. Glow Up Skincare was first, A $15,000 contract for monthly posts featuring their vitamin C serum. Then came Fit Tonic supplements at $25,000 annually, Boss Life productivity planners at $18,000, and Lux Travel luggage at $30,000. By year 4, she'd added Chick Threads boutique clothing, Radiant Smile teeth whitening, mindful morning meditation apps, and Pure Glow wellness teas to her roster. Each partnership came with detailed contracts specifying post frequency, engagement metrics, and most critically, morality clauses. The standard language was always the same. The brand reserved the right to terminate immediately if the influencer engaged in behavior that could damage the brand's reputation, including but not limited to illegal activity, unethical conduct, or public controversies. Madison had signed them all without a second thought. Morality clauses were for people who got caught doing something stupid, and Madison Kensington was too smart to get caught. Her content strategy was meticulous. Every post was A/B tested, every story sequence designed to drive engagement, every reel scripted to maximize shares. She'd mastered the art of the humble brag, the strategic vulnerability drop, and the call to action disguised as genuine connection. You guys asked how I stay so organized, so I'm sharing my exact planner system, link in bio. Translation: here's an affiliate link where I make 20% commission. Her most successful content series was Real Talk Tuesdays, where she'd share supposedly unfiltered thoughts about entrepreneurship, self-care, and overcoming obstacles, all filmed in golden hour lighting with professional color grading. Her followers ate it up, convinced they were getting the real Madison, when in reality they were getting the most carefully constructed version of her she could manufacture. But the empire had cracks that her followers couldn't see. Behind the scenes, Madison operated on a principle she'd learned early. Why pay for anything when you could get it for exposure? She'd approach small businesses, photographers, graphic designers, and contractors with the same pitch. I have 2.8 million followers. Think of the visibility you'll get when I tag you. This is worth way more than your normal fee. Most said no, but some, desperate for a break or dazzled by her follower count, said yes. Susan Chen had been one of them. 2 years ago, Susan owned a small boutique PR firm specializing in product launches for female entrepreneurs. Madison had approached her with a proposal: handle her brand partnerships, negotiate her contracts, and manage her sponsorship portfolio in exchange for exposure and a percentage of future growth. Susan, impressed by Madison's numbers and seduced by promises of becoming the PR firm behind the influencer, agreed to a trial period. She worked for 6 months, securing Madison an additional $200,000 in partnerships, renegotiating existing contracts for better terms, and building systems that professionalized Madison's entire operation. When Susan finally invoiced for the agreed-upon percentage, $43,000, Madison's response came via text message. I think the exposure you got from being associated with me is payment enough. Let's call it even. Susan wasn't calling it even. Susan was calling a lawyer. Then Judge Judy's producers, and now here they both were, in a courtroom where Madison's favorite weapon, her carefully curated image, was about to become her greatest liability. The courtroom fell into that particular kind of silence that precedes a storm. The kind where even breathing feels too loud. Judge Judy Scheindlin closed the case file with a deliberate snap that echoed off the wood-paneled walls, then removed her reading glasses with the slow precision of someone preparing to dismantle an argument, piece by piece. Her eyes, dark and unforgiving, moved from the file to Madison's face, then down to the phone still clutched in her hand, its ring light casting an artificial glow that looked grotesque under the courtroom's fluorescent ceiling lights. The judge's expression didn't change. No raised eyebrow, no theatrical gasp, just the flat, assessing stare of someone who'd seen every variety of human foolishness and had long ago exhausted her capacity for surprise. Excuse me, Judge Judy said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel through skin, each word enunciated with the kind of precision that made you understand. She wasn't asking a question so much as issuing a statement of disbelief. Are you filming in my courtroom? Madison's face lit up with what she clearly believed was her most charming smile, the one she used in sponsored content when she was about to reveal a discount code. Yes, Your Honor. My followers have been so supportive during this difficult time, and I promise them transparency. This is educational content about the legal system, and I think it's important for young women to see that we can stand up for ourselves even when— Stop talking. The command came without raised volume, but with such absolute authority that Madison's mouth snapped shut mid-sentence, her smile freezing into something closer to a grimace. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly, her hands folded on the bench in front of her, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of 3 decades practicing law and 25 years eviscerating excuses on national television. This is not a stage. This is not content. This is a court of law, and in my courtroom you follow my rules. Turn it off. Now! Madison's fingers hesitated over the phone screen, her thumb hovering above the red recording button like she was defusing a bomb. The live comment feed was exploding with reactions, hundreds of messages per second scrolling past so fast they blurred into a stream of emojis and capital letters. OMG, Judge Judy is iconic and Madison don't back down. And this is the best content ever. Her viewer count had climbed to 680,000, more than she'd ever pulled for a live stream, and every instinct in her influencer brain was screaming that this was golden, viral, career-defining material. But Judge Judy's stare didn't waver, didn't blink, just bore into her with the intensity of someone who'd spent decades watching people calculate whether they could get away with defiance and had learned to recognize the exact moment they realized they couldn't. Your Honor, I just need to tell my followers that Madison started. But Judge Judy's hand rose in a gesture that could have stopped traffic, her wedding ring catching the light as her palm faced forward in universal symbol for silence. I don't care about your followers. I don't care about your content calendar. I don't care if the Pope himself is waiting for this stream. You have 5 seconds to turn that phone off or I'm holding you in contempt, and you can explain to your followers from a holding cell why you thought my courtroom was your personal studio. 5, 4. Madison's face flushed, the perfectly applied contour suddenly visible as stark lines across her cheekbones as blood rushed to her skin. Her followers had never seen her like this. Rattled, off script, without the control she wielded so carefully in her curated world. She fumbled with the phone, her fingers suddenly clumsy, and tapped the screen to end the live stream. But in her panic, she hit the wrong button first, accidentally switching the camera to selfie mode, giving her 680,000 viewers a close-up of her face, eyes wide and watering. Before the screen finally went black with the words "Live ended," the silence that followed felt like a physical presence in the room. Madison lowered the phone to the podium, her hand shaking slightly, and looked up to find Judge Judy already moving on, her attention shifting to the case file as if the confrontation had been merely a minor interruption to the business at hand. Now then, the judge said, her tone returning to businesslike efficiency. Ms. Kensington, you're the plaintiff in this case. You claim Ms. Chen owes you for damaged reputation and emotional distress stemming from her public complaints about your business arrangement. Is that correct? Madison straightened, trying to recover her composure, smoothing her blazer and clearing her throat. This was the moment she'd prepared for, the narrative she'd constructed and rehearsed in front of her bathroom mirror that morning, while her ring light charged. Yes, Your Honor. Susan and I had an agreement that she would handle my brand partnerships, and when the results weren't what I expected, I decided to end our working relationship. Instead of being professional about it, she started posting on social media that I didn't pay her, which is completely false and has damaged my reputation with my sponsors. And Judge Judy's hand rose again, this time accompanied by an expression that suggested she'd just tasted something sour. I didn't ask for your manifesto. I asked a yes or no question. The answer was yes. Now sit down. Susan Chen stepped forward when Judge Judy gestured for the defendant to present her case, and from her worn briefcase she pulled out a stack of documents that looked about 3 inches thick, each page marked with neon tabs in different colors. Her voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands as she began laying out the timeline, the emails, the text messages, the contracts she'd negotiated on Madison's behalf that had earned the influencer an additional $200,000 in 6 months. She presented bank statements showing the deposits from sponsors, spreadsheets documenting hours worked, and most devastatingly, a series of text messages that told the entire story in Madison's own words. Judge Judy took the phone Susan offered, reading glasses sliding back onto her nose as she scrolled through the conversation thread, her expression growing darker with each swipe. Let me read this for the record, Judge Judy said, and Madison's face went from flush to pale in the span of a breath. March 15th, Ms. Chen texts, Madison, I've completed the 6-month trial period. Per our agreement, my fee is 15% of the new partnerships I secured, which totals $43,000, invoice attached. And your response, Ms. Kensington, was, Susan, I've been thinking about this, and honestly, the exposure you got from working with me is worth way more than money. Every time I mention you in my stories, my followers see your business. That's invaluable. I think we're even. Then when Ms. Chen responded asking for payment as agreed, you wrote, and I quote, I'm disappointed you're being so transactional about this. I thought we were building something together, but I guess you only care about money. This is exactly why I need to be more careful about who I work with. The judge looked up from the phone, her eyes finding Madison's with laser precision. Does that sound familiar? Madison opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again, her voice higher than before, defensive edges creeping in. Your Honor, that's taken out of context. Susan knew when we started working together that this was a partnership based on mutual growth. and the visibility she received from being associated with my brand was, stop. Judge Judy placed the phone on the bench with a control that was somehow more frightening than if she'd slammed it down. You made an agreement. She performed her services. You benefited financially to the tune of $200,000. And then you decided unilaterally that her payment should be exposure, instead of the money you'd agreed to. That's not a partnership. That's theft dressed up in Instagram language. The words hung in the courtroom like an indictment, and in that moment on the other side of the country, in a bright corner office in Manhattan, the social media manager for Glow Up Skincare was watching a screen-recorded version of Madison's abruptly ended live stream that someone had already uploaded to Twitter. The manager's hand was frozen on her mouse as she listened to Judge Judy's assessment, and then she was picking up her phone, texting her boss, who was texting the CEO, who was opening the morality clause in Madison's contract and reading the words unethical conduct and public controversies, while his finger hovered over the termination notice template they kept on file for exactly these situations. Back in the courtroom, Madison was spiraling, her carefully constructed arguments evaporating under the heat of actual scrutiny. But, Your Honor, influencer partnerships work differently than traditional business, and the value of social media exposure can't be quantified in the same way as... Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, and something in her posture suggested she'd heard enough, had reached the point where patience gave way to verdict. Ms. Kensington, I've been practicing law since before you were born. I know exactly what you did here. You used this woman's expertise, benefited enormously from her work, and then tried to pay her in something that costs you nothing and benefits you more than it benefits her. The fact that you did it with a smile and hashtags doesn't make it any less exploitative. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $43,000 plus court costs. You will pay Ms. Chen every penny she's owed, and you will do it within 30 days or I'll have the bailiff escort you back here to explain why you haven't. We're done. Madison's hands trembled as she gathered her phone and portfolio from the plaintiff's podium, the weight of Judge Judy's judgment pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. The bailiff was already calling the next case, and she stumbled toward the gallery exit, her designer heels clicking against the floor in a rhythm that sounded like retreat. Susan Chen remained at the defendant's podium for a moment longer, accepting a copy of the judgment with a quiet nod of gratitude, her face showing relief mixed with something sadder, the expression of someone who'd won a battle but lost a friendship in the process. Madison pushed through the courtroom doors into the hallway where other litigants waited on benches, their eyes following her, some with recognition, others with curiosity, all of them witnesses to her exit from a confrontation she'd expected to win. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Once, twice. Then a cascade of vibrations that felt like a swarm of wasps attacking her palm. Madison stopped walking, her back against the hallway wall, and looked at the screen. Email notification from Glow Up Skincare, subject line, partnership termination effective immediately. Her stomach dropped. She swiped to open it, her eyes scanning the corporate language that boiled down to 3 words. You're fired. Before she could process it, another notification appeared. This one from Fit Tonic Supplements, same subject line, same corporate politeness, masking the same brutal message. Then Boss Life Planners, then Lux Travel Luggage. The notifications kept coming, each one a tiny explosion destroying a piece of her income, her status, her carefully constructed empire. Madison's breathing quickened, her chest tightening as she watched her phone light up with rejection after rejection. Chic Threads Boutique partnership terminated. Radiant Smile teeth whitening contract canceled. Mindful Morning Meditation app collaboration ended. Pure Glow Wellness Teas sponsorship withdrawn. In the span of 4 minutes, 8 major brand partnerships representing $847,000 in annual revenue vanished. Not scattered across weeks of deliberation and legal review, but deleted in real time by social media managers and brand executives who'd watched the screen-recorded live stream, spreading across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram like a wildfire-consuming dry brush. Each termination email included a reference to Section 7, Paragraph 3 of her contract, the morality clause she'd signed without reading. The words unethical conduct and behavior damaging to brand reputation highlighted in bold. Her phone rang, the screen displaying her manager's name, Derek Platinum, though his real name was Derek Goldstein, and he'd changed it because he thought it sounded more successful. Madison answered with shaking fingers, and before she could speak, Derek's voice came through. Not angry, but panicked. The tone of someone watching their 15% commission evaporate. Madison, what the hell happened in there? I'm getting termination notices from every single sponsor. Glow Up's PR team just released a statement on Twitter saying they stand for ethical business practices and fair compensation. Boss Life posted that they're committed to supporting small businesses, not exploiting them. This is a catastrophe. You need to post something, an apology, an explanation, something to stop the bleeding before. Madison hung up. She couldn't listen. Couldn't process his panic on top of her own. Couldn't hear him say out loud what she was already thinking. That the career she'd spent 6 years building was collapsing in the time it took to film a morning routine reel. 2 months later, Madison Kensington's Instagram feed told a story of reinvention that nobody was buying. The perfectly curated aesthetic remained. The golden hour lighting still flattering, but the captions had shifted to a new narrative. The comeback story, the humbled entrepreneur, the woman who'd learned hard lessons and was now committed to authenticity. Real growth happens when we face our mistakes, read one post over a photo of her journaling at a coffee shop. The composition still professionally staged, despite the message of rawness. Her follower count had plummeted from 2.8 million to 2.1 million, and the engagement told an even grimmer story. Posts that once received 200,000 likes now struggled to break 15,000, and the comments section had become a graveyard of criticism she couldn't delete fast enough. The judgment remained unpaid. Susan Chen's lawyer had filed for wage garnishment after the 30-day deadline passed without payment, and Madison's bank account, once flush with sponsor deposits, now showed automatic withdrawals going to the woman she'd tried to pay in exposure. A few small brands had reached out, companies desperate enough for influencer attention that they'd overlook a viral courtroom humiliation, but nothing remotely comparable to what she'd lost. The screen recording of her livestream had become permanent internet archaeology, reposted on Reddit, discussed in YouTube commentary, videos with titles like "Influencer Gets Destroyed" by Judge Judy, and turned into TikTok audio clips that people used for their own content about accountability. Judge Judy's words, "That's theft dressed up in Instagram language," had been clipped, mimed and referenced so many times it had entered the cultural lexicon, a shorthand for influencer exploitation that brands now cited in revised contracts with morality clauses that specifically mentioned courtroom appearances and ethical business practices. Madison posted her "What I Learned" video on a Thursday afternoon, her face makeup free for perceived authenticity, her voice soft with rehearsed contrition as she spoke about growth and accountability and doing better. The comments rolled in within seconds. "You only learned not to get caught, and pay Susan what you owe her," and "the internet never forgets." Susan Chen's boutique PR firm, meanwhile, had received inquiries from 47 new clients in the 2 months since the trial, small business owners who'd seen her stand up to an influencer and win, who wanted someone in their corner, who understood that exposure didn't pay rent. She'd hired 2 employees and moved into a larger office, the kind of growth that came not from association with someone famous, but from doing good work and having receipts when it mattered. The courtroom footage still circulated, but for Susan it had become validation rather than humiliation. Proof that sometimes the system worked, that judges like Judy Chandlin existed to cut through the performance and see the truth underneath. And Madison Kensington, sitting in her apartment scrolling through termination emails she'd read 100 times, finally understood what Judge Judy had been trying to tell her. That influence without integrity was just noise. That audiences could smell desperation underneath the filter, and that some mistakes didn't get a second take. The red recording light on her ring light blinked off, and for the first time in 6 years, Madison didn't immediately think about turning it back on.